I want you to picture this. It's January 2000 in the deep valleys of southeastern Oklahoma, where the mountains, they swallow the light, and the woods, they stretch out like something that's alive. A group of deer hunters, they were good folks, with their kids right by their side. They settled into a remote cabin for the night, fire crackling, stories flowing, thinking that the dark outside is just empty quiet. They've heard odd howls before, but they brush it off as coyotes or just wind. And that's when the rocks start hitting. Small at first, but it's still rattling the roof like hail. The men, they step out and flashlights slicing the black. That's when the woods go dead silent. Then they noticed a red glow in the trees. Was it eyes staring back at them? Then later, the pounding, it ramps up. Then logs start slamming the walls. And the door, it's shaking so hard that it seems like something is testing it. Screams, they rip the air deep. And guttural roars are echoing from all sides, circling in closer. And that's when the stench rolls in. They decide to fire a warning shot, but the shapes, they seem to move closer. And that's when you wonder, what's out there and what do they want? Finally, dawn, it brings silence. But the footprints and the fear, it lingers. This happened, and it's just the start of what lurks in those shadows. I want you to stick around because tonight, the confessions from the dark, it'll make you check every window twice. Welcome back, listeners and watchers, to another dark and disturbing episode of Relative Perspective. As always, I'm your host, Stephen, and tonight we're kicking off Cryptid Month, the very first of 4 spine-tingling installments that will take us deep into the unknown over the next few weeks. Tonight, we're talking about Bigfoot, that towering silent giant who's been walking the edges of our world for centuries, slipping in and out of the trees just long enough to change the lives of thousands of ordinary people forever. From the foggy rainforest of the Pacific Northwest to the misty swamps of Florida, from the rolling hills of Ohio to the lonely highways of Pennsylvania and the pine-shadowed backroads of Texas. These are not tall tales told around a dying campfire. These are raw, first-hand confessions from people like hunters who froze mid-step, truckers who nearly swerved off the road, moms who clutched their children tighter, and even battle-hardened Marines who felt their blood run cold when the woods suddenly went silent, and something looked back. One moment, they're living normal lives. The next, everything that they thought they knew about what was real and what was possible was ripped away in a single heartbeat. No blurry photos and no shaky videos. Just honest voices still shaking as they describe the long arms, the intelligent eyes, and the feeling that whatever this was, it knew that they were there, and it chose to let them see. These confessions, they don't just scare us, they make us question everything. Because the truth, it depends on where you are standing, and that is relative perspective. Let's go ahead and start out our journey and point our gaze south to the wild valleys of southeastern Oklahoma, where the Ouachita Mountains, they rise up thick with pine and oak, carving out hidden pockets that are so remote that the night, it swallows every single sound, except for the ones that don't belong. This unfolded in January of 2000 near a quiet spot called Honobia. A group of deer hunters, they were good folks, and they actually grew up in those woods. And like every other year, they gathered there for the season. There was Mike Farmer, his brother, a few close friends, and even some kids tagged along. And they were all excited for those campfire tales and the thrill of the hunt. They sat up in a remote cabin miles from the nearest road. This was the kind of place where the stars burn bright overhead, and the darkness, it presses in close. There was no neighbors, no lights, just the crackling of their fire inside, and the vast breathing quiet outside. Now, the first night, it felt normal enough. They came back from their stands with stories of near misses. Then they grilled up some venison and they settled in with cards and coffee. But as the moon climbed and that valley went black, it shifted. It started with the screams, deep rumbling howls that tore through the air like a wounded beast, starting low and building into a piercing wail that made your skin crawl. This wasn't a coyote's yip or a bobcat's growl. These were guttural, almost human-like roars, echoing off the ridges. One call answering another, like they were having a conversation in the dark. The group, they jumped up and they stepped out on the porch, flashlights cutting thin beams into the trees, and their rifles were loose in their hands. They thought to themselves, what could it be that was out there making that noise? Was it a bear in pain, or something much worse? The lights, they caught nothing, just swaying branches and shadows that seemed to move just a little too slow. Not long after that came the wood knocks. Sharp cracks like someone was slamming a log against a trunk. Once, twice, and then silence. But the silence, it didn't last long, because those first two knocks were answered, but it was closer this time. The kids, they huddled inside, their eyes were wide, while the adults, they whispered it off as echoes or animals playing tricks. But deep down, that chill, it started to settle in. The next night, it escalated. That's when rocks began pelting the cabin. There were small pebbles at first, rattling that tin roof like rain. Then came the bigger stones. They were thumping the walls so hard that it was shaking the windows. The men, they grabbed their guns again and pointed their flashlights out in the yard. And that's when they saw the eyes, glowing red in the beam. High off the ground, 7 or 8 feet high, staring back, unblinking from the tree line. Not deer eyes. They said that this wasn't anything that they'd hunted before. The shape behind them, they said it was massive. It was broad-shouldered, covered in dark hair, and standing upright like a man, but he was built like a wall. I guess they got tired of throwing rocks because they started throwing huge logs next. They were crashing so hard against that cabin that it was denting the wood. Then they noticed the creatures circling, grunting and whooping the whole time. And their foul smell was rolling in like wet rot and musk. It was so bad that it made their eyes water and their stomach turn. Then they started getting closer. One got so close that he actually slammed his fist on the door, the whole frame rattling as if testing if it would give. Through the windows, they caught glimpses. These things were 8 or 9 feet tall. They said that they had huge arms and faces flat and dark with small eyes that locked on you, almost like they knew your fear. The kids, they tried to be tough, but they couldn't handle it. They cried out, clutching each other, while Mike and the other adults, they loaded their rifles. And then they fired warning shots in the air. They did better than I would. I would probably have to point my rifle at one of these things. That's when the roars, they exploded back, angrier and loud enough to shake the glass. All night it went on, the pounding, the circling, and the feeling of being probed like prey in a trap. Was that a hand scratching at that latch? Would the walls hold if those monsters charged? The group, they barricaded those doors with what furniture they had and whispered plans for dawn, wondering if the creatures, they were just toying with them or waiting for them to make the first mistake. Then it got worse. Out in the yard, they heard something big tearing into a deer carcass that they'd hung earlier. Bones cracking, flesh ripping, like a dark message warning them to stay away. These people, they were terrorized the whole night. But come sunrise, that's when the assault faded. The hunters, they fled, leaving gear behind and shaken to the core. Mike, he decided to go public later, his voice still edged with that night. And a couple of days later, the Bigfoot Research Organization, or better known as BFRO, they actually found the footprints. They said that they were massive and deep, and later on that night, they recorded some of the screams and howls that the hunters heard earlier. And they claimed that those sounds that they recorded, they matched no known animal. Those folks, they never hunted the same again. They would always listen for that first howl in the dark. Encounters like this, they dig deep, and it almost makes you wonder what's really out there watching. Because sometimes the woods, they don't just fight back. They take you with them, deep into places that no one was meant to see. All right, let's leave those Oklahoma valleys behind and head up north to the rugged inlets of British Columbia in 1924, where the coast meets the mountains in a tangle of cedar and fir that's so dense, a man could walk for days without seeing another soul. This is the story of Albert Ostman, a sturdy Swedish-born prospector in his early 30s, out chasing gold rumors in the Toba Inlet right near Vancouver Island. Now, Albert, he wasn't unskilled. He spent years in the bush as a prospector and a lumberjack. So, needless to say, he knew how to handle a rifle and he knew how to pack a sleeping bag. And he had heard the old First Nation tales from his guide about the big people in the woods. He was told that these were hairy giants that left tracks bigger than any bear. He laughed it off as campfire folklore, set up his camp alone by a stream, cooked his supper, and crawled into his sleeping bag under the stars. This night was still, the kind where the waters trickle, it lulls you to sleep. But sometime in the dark hours, something changed. Albert, he woke up to a jolt. His whole body was lifted off the ground, sleeping bag and all, and he was slung over a massive shoulder like a huge bag of flour. At first, he didn't know what was going on. When he finally got his senses together and he realized where he was, he thought that maybe he was in a small avalanche or something was throwing him over a horse. But then he realized there wasn't any snow around. That's when he felt coarse hair brushing his face. Then he heard heavy breathing and the crunching of branches under huge feet. That's when he realized he was not riding a horse, and panic hit him hard. He was so shocked that he couldn't yell or fight. The thing, it carried him through the wilderness for what felt like 3 or 4 hours. And this thing was shaking him so hard that what supplies that he had with him were rattling in that bag. Finally, it stopped in a small cliff-ringed valley, hidden like a secret bowl in the mountains. The creature, it dumped Albert out, and in the faint moonlight, that's when he got his first look. Standing there was what he called the old man. He was 8 feet tall, maybe 800 pounds, and covered in reddish-brown hair from head to toe. He said that he was broad as a barrel with a flat face, wide mouth, and small black eyes that watched him steady. They had no clothes on, just that thick pelt. And he said it was moving on 2 legs like a person, but with power that made the ground tremble. Then Albert looked around, and that's when he saw the others. An old lady, slightly shorter, around 7 feet. He said that she had sagging breasts and longer hair on her head. Then he saw a younger male. He said he was about 7 feet as well. He said he was playful, but he was strong. And then he saw another one. He called this one the shy female. She was about 5 or 6 feet, and she was peeking out from behind the other ones. He said that they grunted and clicked at each other. They were gestures like words. And they were circling Albert like they were curious, and they weren't attacking. He grabbed his knife quietly, and he knew that the rifle was still in his bag. And that whole time he was wondering if they saw him as food or something to keep. Now, you might ask why he didn't shoot with that rifle he had. He said he had a 30-30. Now, the story goes, he said that he had watched a movie, an older movie, where he saw some people shooting a gorilla, and they had a much higher powered rifle than he had with him, and he said they shot that gorilla like 3 or 4 times, but that thing's still charged. So you can definitely understand why he decided to wait it out and see what would happen. For 6 long days, they held him there. Now, they didn't chain him up because somehow they knew that those cliffs were too steep for him to climb without them being able to catch him. Now, the weird part about this story is the giants, they were actually hospitable. They fed him roots and sweet grass from what looked like a woven bark box. He said that the stuff tasted like celery, and thank God he had it because he said it kept him alive. Albert, he paid attention to them the whole time, watching their life unfold. The old man gathering food at dawn, the kids wrestling gentle, but they were rough enough to snap branches, and the female would sort plants almost like she was weaving. And he said that the smell was terrible. He said it was thick and musky, like wet dog and decay, and it clung to everything. He was shocked to see that they communicated kind of like us, but they used rumbles and clicks as their language. And the young male, it even tried to play with Albert. He said it was nudging him like a pup with a toy. But the stares, those small eyes locking on him, that made his skin crawl. Was he a pet, a mate for their daughter, or just a curiosity until they got tired of him? He said the nights were the worst, laying there in his bag, listening to their breaths, and feeling the ground shake as they walked around, all the while wondering if he'd ever see the real world again. On the 6th day, Albert, he saw his chance. He offered the old man his snuff tobacco. He said that he tried to make that snuff look appealing to that old man, and it worked. The creature, he snatched and swallowed that thing whole. Now, I don't know if you've ever swallowed chewing tobacco, but believe me, it makes you feel like crap. That thing, it started choking, vomiting, and roaring in pain. And chaos erupted as the family, it rushed in to help. That's when Albert, he saw his chance. He grabbed his rifle, he fired a warning shot into the air, and ran as fast as he could down that mountain, heart exploding, expecting a hand to yank him back any second. He hiked for what felt like days, starving and scared, until he stumbled into a logging camp. Now, what's strange about this story is Albert, he kept his secret for over 30 years. Because, as you can imagine, he thought that people were going to call him crazy. Now, I want you to remember this was in 1924. The word Bigfoot, it didn't even exist then. He didn't feel comfortable talking about it until later when he realized that other people were sharing their stories. So, in 1957, he swore an affidavit right before a magistrate. And he even told his stories in a few interviews. And he also passed a few lie detectors. His details, they matched sightings that no one knew about back then. Things like how they interacted with each other, what they looked like, and what they ate. Now, Albert, he died in 1975, still swearing that every word was true. And that look in his eyes was distant, like he can feel that huge shoulder under him again. You see, stories like this, they twist your gut. And they make you wonder what else those mountains hide. Because sometimes, the dark, it doesn't just watch or attack. It kills, leaving marks no man can explain. Okay, let's head up to the cold coast of Alaska, to this forgotten spot called Portlock in the Kenai Peninsula, where the ocean meets the mountains in thick fog, and the woods, they feel like they're watching every single move that you make. This story, it goes back to the 1920s, when Portlock, it popped up as a busy cannery town. You had loggers, fishermen, and families all coming in for the salmon and the timber work. They built houses, a school for the kids, a post office, the whole 9 yards. They did their best to carve out a life in that rugged terrain. But the local Dena'ina Athabascan people, who'd been there forever, told them straight up about the thing that they called the Nantinak, which means the hairy man. This was a huge, shaggy creature roaming the hills, leaving huge tracks and howls that make your blood run cold. They said that it wasn't just some weird looking animal. They considered it almost like a guardian spirit. And it really got angry when people cut down too many trees or took too much from the land. And of course, the settlers, they just laughed it off. They just figured that it was old stories to keep outsiders away. But in the 1930s and 40s, that's when things got real, and they got real bad. It started with folks disappearing. You had loggers heading out at dawn with their axes that never came back, and their camps were left messy like a tornado went through it. Their tools were scattered all over the place. The fire was still smoking, almost like they had been grabbed right in the middle of doing their work. Not long after that, that's when the bodies started showing up. They were dragged into clearings, or they saw them wash up on the beach. Their throats were mutilated. Their arms and legs were crushed as if they were squeezed in a vise, and a lot of them had their ribs smashed in, almost like they were hit with a sledgehammer. Now, one guy later on was found beaten to death with this huge, heavy logging hook. This was the kind of tool that was way too heavy for any one person to swing. Another, it floated up on the beach with huge fang marks. His body, it was laid out like it was on purpose. And his eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. And the crazy thing, around every single one of these poor souls, they found massive footprints, 18 inches long, sunk deep, circling around them like whatever did this, it was tightening the noose. Now, believe it or not, the nights, they were way worse. The howls, they started low from the fog, building into these gut-wrenching wails that shook the windows, and it made the kids pull their covers over their heads. Just like our first story, rocks came flying in from the dark and thudding against roofs like knocks at the door. Now understand this, it wasn't just faraway scares. They often saw shadows move just outside their lantern's light. They were tall and hulking, with a smell that hit you like rotten meat and wet dirt. Hell, it was so bad that it made the dogs bark and most of the villagers gag. Now, one account, it tells about one misty night that a cannery worker, they spotted it. It was a 10-foot tall shape in the haze, broad and covered in matted hair all over its body. Then they noticed the eyes. They said that they were glowing like red-hot coals. They raised their rifle and they shot at it, but this thing slipped away in the mist, only leaving behind that same smell that they remembered from before. Now, as you can imagine, the killings, they didn't stop. Later accounts, they claimed that a hunter was pulled screaming into the woods. They said that they could hear him screaming and hollering for help, but then, all of a sudden, there was nothing. There was no sound at all. And that wasn't the only encounter. Later, a young child was taken from their yard. The air was still and quiet where she had been playing just minutes before. The Dena'ina folks warned the settlers that Nantinak was mad, and he was taking back what was stolen. The trees that were taken without mercy, and the land, it was stolen without remorse. Now, as you can imagine, by the 1950s, nobody could take it anymore. You had families that packed up in the dead of night, loading boats with shaking hands, leaving their homes, the cannery. Hell, they left everything behind just to rot in the rain. Portlock, it turned empty, a ghost town with buildings falling apart. Even today, people that go exploring, they talk about the same eerie accounts. The fog rolling in all of a sudden, the rocks whizzing through the air, loud tree knocks from each side of the island, and howls that make your skin crawl. That feeling that something is staring right through you and waiting for you to make the wrong move. Naturally, no one has dared to ever move back. That island is left to the Nantinak, whatever that is. Stories like this, they tend to stick with you, making you listen just a little closer to that noise in the dark. And that's the thread that goes through these three stories I just told. The anticipation, the fear, and the unknown. Okay, we've heard the confessions. You had the sieges, the abductions, and the killings that leave you staring at the ceiling long after the lights are out. Now that you've heard the stories, let's talk about where people think that these giants come from. How does something so massive, so real to those who faced it, stay hidden in a world that we've mapped to almost every single inch? Let's go ahead and dig into the roots, the old whispers that echo through time, and the riddles that keep us guessing what this thing really is. I want you to go back with me to the very beginning, before there were satellites and Google Earth, where the first people of this land walked the same forests and mountains that we have today. Those tribes, they knew this giant long before any settlers ever did, and they had names for it, stories that were passed down from generation to generation. The Salish of the Pacific Northwest, they're the ones that called it Sasquatch, which means the wild man. This was a being that lived in the misty peaks. Sometimes they looked at it as a protector, and sometimes it was a thief of children who tend to stray too far. Then you had the Yakama tribe. They called it the Stigihama. Now, you have to remember, I'm definitely not Native American, so if I mess any of these words up, I apologize. I'm doing my best. These are kind of hard words to say. But again, they called it the Stigihama, which means the stick Indians. These things were hairy giants who threw rocks and mimicked voices to lure in the unaware. Then, down in Texas, where I'm from, I'm sure you can tell from my accent, you had the Caddo tribe that whispered of a giant called Hayachitsi. These were the lost giants who roamed the piney woods. Then there was the Seminole tribe in Florida that had the skunk ape. Now, I know you've heard of this guy before. The reason why they call him the skunk ape is because he's stinky. And the Seminole people, they said the same thing. Now, you have to understand, these weren't just tales to scare the kids. They looked at them like lessons. These monsters, they wanted our respect, and sometimes our fear, because they were the land's older inhabitants. And then there were the Yokuts in California that had all that rock art that showed hairy figures that were at least 1,000 years old. They looked at these things like guardians of the wild. Then you had the Cherokee tribe, and they told us of the Sukalu. This was a slant-eyed giant of the Appalachians, a being that could vanish like smoke when it was pursued. Across the continent, those stories, they match with what we hear today about what's going on out there. They're tall, they're hairy, they stand upright, they have intelligent eyes, and they smell worse than death. The tribes, they didn't hunt them. They lived alongside them, knowing that the giants were here first. This was all part of the balance that they lived. But what if those roots run even deeper, into something more that we can't explain? That's where the mysteries start, the theories that try to pin down what this thing is, pulling from those ancient whispers and the confessions that we just heard. Let's go ahead and jump into some of those theories right now. Some believe that this thing is a relict primate, a survivor from prehistoric times like the Gigantopithecus. This was a massive ape from Asia that stood more than 9 feet tall, and he ate bamboo. Some believe that it might have crossed the Bering Land Bridge during the Ice Age, adapting to North America's forests and hiding in the vast wilderness where nobody's looking. Now, that explains the footprints, some of the hair samples that test as unknown primate, and the purposeful walks in daylight sightings. But how does an animal that big evade cameras and hunters for centuries? And why the intelligence, the rock throws, the wood knocks, and the way it seems to know when you're alone? Now, others, they point to a darker theory, the paranormal side, a being that slips between worlds, and that would explain the sudden silences in the woods, the way it vanishes in mid-stride, and all those orbs of light that are seen near sightings. And what if it's interdimensional, stepping through veils that we just can't see? And they're also tied to UFO sightings and skinwalker legends. Now, if you've listened to the tribal stories, they often describe them as either shapeshifters or spirits, not just flesh and bone. And that kind of fits the high strangeness of our three stories. The mental pressure and the fear that the villagers felt, and the coordinated attacks in Honobia. Now, our next theory, it has to do with government cover-ups. Some claim that this is a protected species or an experiment that went way wrong, with black helicopters chasing witnesses silent and encounter spots guarded, ensuring that nobody enters. Then the question that I get all the time, why are there no bodies? Some believe it's because they're collected and hauled away. Now, we even go darker with these theories. The idea that this thing is a remnant human, like a feral tribe or a Neanderthal survivor. This kind of explains the language like grunts and the family grouping that was told in our Ostman story. Or we can go even deeper. Some people believe that this is an ancient giant, a biblical one. Some people claim that this is a Nephilim from old texts, wandering the earth as punishment. Now, each of these theories, they tug at those confessions that we told earlier, making you wonder, is it animal, spirit, or something that we created in our fears? The roots, they say that this thing has always been here, but the mysteries say that we may never know for sure. But that's the pull, isn't it? The not knowing, it keeps us up at night wondering if we will ever get a chance to see this. Go ahead and do me a favor. I want you to let me know what you think this thing is down in the comments. Or do you believe that it's fake? You believe everything's a hoax? Now, I want to give everyone their chance to be heard. You have skeptics versus believers, and I'd like to know which side you fall on. Okay, we've heard all those chilling encounters, the pounding on the cabin walls in Honobia, the strange family that carried Ostman away, and the broken bodies found at Portlock. And then we heard about the roots that make you wonder, have these giants always been part of the land? But now comes the real divide, the one that keeps us all wondering. You have skeptics on one side and believers on the other. Let's hear both out fair and square, and see what sticks in that space between. The skeptics, they lay it out calm and clear, rooted in facts that you can test. They say that Bigfoot is just a trick of the mind, just shadows that some people turn into something more. Their best question is, where is the hard proof? They want to know where the bodies are, they want to know where the bones are, and they want to know about the DNA that doesn't match anything that we know. You had the 2014 Oxford study that checked dozens of Bigfoot hairs from sightings everywhere. And they said that every one of them came back as something ordinary. They came back as either bear, cow, dog, hell, they even had porcupine. There was no mystery there. Then they look at the footprints. They claim that they're often fakes, just like Ray Wallace's wooden ones in 1958. That was actually the hoax that put Bigfoot in the headlines and sparked this whole legend. They dig into the stories that we told as well. They claim that the Honobia attacks were either storms or just pranksters. And then they look at Ostman's tale. They claim that this was just a yarn that this man spun, but, being alone too long in the woods. They say that most people that claim to see these things that stand up 7 or 8 feet tall, they say that bears can do that easily. And not only that, whenever they, those heavy bears, they step down in the mud and it kind of slides a little bit, they say that can look like a large human foot. I mean, that's basically our brains playing tricks on us. They explain that fear can turn a coyote's call into a roar and shadows into giants. They say that all this thing is folklore, the kind that comforts our fear of the unknown, but it's not real. They say, why no bodies on the road? They say, because there's nothing out there to hit. Now, let's give the believers a chance to push back. The believers' words, they carry the weight of the people who've actually seen this thing firsthand. And they stand on the stack of reports, over 5,000 in the BFRO alone. And these are from everyday people like cops and scientists who have a lot to risk by putting their neck out there like that. Then you have Jane Goodall, the ape expert, who claimed that this could really be true. And she pointed at the patterns. You have long arms, smart eyes, the foot bend that no fake could pull off, and those ridges on the cast that are like real fingerprints. Some of these things, they're way too detailed to be tricks. And that Oxford study that they did in 2014, it doesn't mention the older tests that were done on some hairs that said that this was from an unknown primate or something unknown. And all these stories, they line up through time. Then they ask you questions about how do you explain the Patterson-Gimlin film. If you look real close, they had muscles that were moving under the hair that no suit could mimic, especially back in 1967. Or you had the Sierra sounds. These were grunts, almost like a hidden language that stumped experts. Some believers, they see a survivor from a long, long ago. They're clever enough to bury their dead and smart enough to stick to wild spots that we ignore. You see, skeptics, they all want bodies. But the believers, they ask, what if it's guarded or just too smart? You have to understand, the unknown, it doesn't just hand over answers easily. You have to be willing to listen for them. Okay, the two sides, they trail off without anyone claiming victory, each side holding their piece of the puzzle. You have skeptics with their clear light and believers with their shadowed spark. But in the middle ground, the woods hold the truth. It's all relative, isn't it? Now, here is where I step in with my own take. Let's get into it. Okay, we have covered a lot tonight. The raw confessions that chill you to the bone, the ancient roots whispering through the trees, the theories that twist your mind, and the back and forth between skeptics and believers. But here is where I step in with my own take. You know, after digging into some of these stories, the pounding in Honobia, Ostman's wild ride, and Portlock's terrifying story, it's easy to get lost in the what ifs. Is it an animal that we haven't caught yet? Something from another world, or just our fears playing tricks on us? The skeptics, they make us a strong case for keeping our feet on the ground, demanding proof that we can actually touch. But the believers, they remind us to keep our eyes open to the mysteries that don't fit any neat boxes. Me, I land somewhere in the middle, and I'm leaning towards the idea that there's more out there than we know. Not because I have a lab full of evidence, but because life's shown me that the unknown, it can definitely be real, even if it scares you half to death. Now, I've told this story before a while back, but I want to retell it for those who haven't heard it yet. I understand that this has nothing to do with Bigfoot, but I've told you earlier that I've seen things, and I think it would be unfair for me just to say that and not tell you what happened. The point of me telling this story is to make you understand that I have no right to tell anyone that has a story, an encounter, or anything like that. I have no right to call anyone a liar, because I saw what I saw, and I know I did. And who am I to tell a person that came to me with a story that you didn't see what you saw? That's just not me. And that is why I tend to believe when a lot of people don't. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's just me. Now, I'm going to share my story, and it's something very personal, and it's something that stuck with me through the years. And it still gives me cold chills when I think about it. I mean, I'm getting cold chills right now. I don't know if you can tell, but I do get cold chills when I talk about it. I was 15 years old. I was laying on a couch, and I was having one of the worst nightmares that I'd ever had. I woke up with my heart pounding. Then I turned my head and I looked up, only to see a presence standing right there at the foot of the couch that I was laying on. Now, as you can imagine, it took me a couple of seconds for my brain to register what the hell I was looking at. And finally, I came to the conclusion that it was exactly what it looked like. To me, it looked just like the Grim Reaper. The only difference is it didn't have that scythe that the Grim Reaper normally carries in those pictures. It was really tall. I had like 8-foot ceilings, and it looked like the head of this thing was like inches away from that ceiling. And I couldn't see a face. It was dark. Other than that hood and that robe this thing was wearing, all I noticed was its hands, and they were huge. Now, like I said, I was laying on this really small couch. My feet and the arms of this thing was really tall, okay? And my feet were hanging off the edge of it like this. And I mean, I couldn't move. The next thing I remember was with those huge hands, this thing grabbed me by my ankles. Now, if this was a dream or my imagination, I can't, I'm not that imaginative. I couldn't imagine something grabbing me on the ankles and feel it like that. And he held me hard. He grabbed me really hard. Then he started pulling me towards him. Now, I know it only lasted probably for a few seconds, but believe me, it felt like it was forever. I mean, him grabbing my feet and pulling me like that, like I said, I'm getting cold chills thinking about it. Anyways, I just started going to church around that, probably a couple of weeks before that. And I just got saved probably 3 days before that. Now, I didn't know much. Hell, I barely even knew how to pray. But I did the only thing that I thought I could do. I closed my eyes as tight as I could, and I prayed for Jesus to save me. And thank God, as soon as those words left my mouth, this thing was gone. He let go of my feet. He was gone. Now, as you can imagine, I definitely didn't sleep for the rest of that night, and I probably didn't sleep for the next couple of nights. Now, as dark as that night was for me, I mean, it doesn't compare to the fear that I've had for years. To this day, it still scares me to death. I still fear waking up and opening my eyes sometimes, thinking that this thing is going to be standing right there, possibly to finish what it started. Hell, I don't know what it wanted, but I really don't want to know. The only thing that I can think of is maybe it was mad that I got saved. I mean, that's really the only thing that I can think it could possibly have been. Because in my mind, this thing was a demon, and I still believe that to this day. And like I said before, I know that this happened to me. You can believe it or not, it makes no difference. It's okay if you don't believe me, that's fine. But I know deep down in my heart that it happened. And who am I to tell anyone that their confessions or their paranormal encounters is a lie when I've felt that same terror? And that proves to me in my heart, just me, not everybody else, but just me, that there's something darker out there. Now, let's get back to Bigfoot, whatever that is. It forces us to look harder at the shadows, to respect the wild places and the secrets that they hold. And maybe that's the real gift, keeping us a little curious, a little scared, and always wondering, what is behind those shadows? Wow, that was freaking deep. I want to thank you guys so much for sticking around for every howl, every shadow, and every confession tonight. It's been a wild start to Cryptid Month. It was kind of unsettling diving into these Bigfoot stories that make you question what's in the dark. And if you've been enjoying these shows, all you have to do is hit the like button, pound down on the subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you don't miss a weekly upload. Next week, we're going to be diving into the Goat Man, and we're going to see how dark this thing goes. Now, if you've got your own scary story, either Bigfoot, something that looked like him, or something even worse, all you have to do is email me at relativeperspective76@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your story, and who knows, we might be able to put it up on a future episode. Sorry, I looked away there. My cat was jumping over there. It kind of scared me. I was thinking about that hooded figure I saw. Anyways, like I said, email me, relativeperspective76@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your story, and like I said, we could put it up on a future episode if you allow us. Now, before we go, I want you to take just one more moment with me. These stories, they remind us that the world is full of mysteries that keep us humble, a little scared, but always curious. I want to thank you again for watching. This is Relative Perspective, and as always, I'm your host, Stephen. God bless you. We love you. And have a good night. Okay, let's go outside. I gotta let my dogs out again. Love you, bye. God bless you, bye.